Sup, chooms? So, it has been a long time since I've uploaded a video, and I think you guys already know the reason why. So, let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room. Yes, my election prediction was catastrophically wrong. I predicted that Kamala Harris would win decisively, when in reality, Trump won every single swing state. I was getting 2022 vibes from this election because I felt that the reason why Trump appeared competitive was because of a bunch of trashy right-wing pollsters that were flooding the aggregates in Trump's favor at the last minute. That's why everybody thought there was going to be a red wave in 2022 during the midterm elections, even though that never materialized. So I thought that history was merely repeating itself this year, and to be fair, there were maybe one or two bright spots that helped sweeten the pill for me, such as when Kari Lake suffered another humiliating defeat in Arizona after claiming election theft when she lost the gubernatorial race in 2022. As it turns out, though, the election was much more like 2016 than 2020 or 2022, except Kamala did even worse than Clinton because at least Clinton won the popular vote. If you guys remember 2016, Clinton, she was basically ahead in the polls early on, but then the whole James Comey fake email scandal dropped. After that, the race looked much more competitive within the final days of the election, which of course culminated in Trump's significant electoral victory vote over Clinton. So, in 2016, it's at least pretty easy to understand why Hillary Clinton lost. It's because she suffered an October surprise 10 days before the election, which she couldn't recover from. Now, I'm of course also aware that the 2016 Trump campaign also had an October surprise in the form of the Access Hollywood tapes, but that happened several weeks earlier than the Clinton scandal, and American voters basically have the memory of a goldfish. If you were to just switch the timing of those two scandals in 2016, then Clinton would have been elected president, not Trump. You can also make the excuse that in 2016, the voters really didn't know what they were getting with Trump back then, which isn't true today. What makes 2024 so perplexing, though, is that Kamala Harris ran a relatively scandal-free campaign that was arguably pretty strong. Her introduction as a candidate got a whole bunch of people really excited and inspired a bunch of memes about palm trees and coconuts, and she absolutely destroyed Trump in the debate, so much so that he didn't even have the balls to appear on stage with her during the second debate. Also, the Democratic convention in Illinois this year was genuinely the most fun and exciting political convention in U.S. history. It's clear, too, that while voters picked apart all of Kamala Harris's flaws, they totally ignored the much worse flaws of Donald Trump. Trump became the elderly candidate in the race as soon as Joe Biden dropped out, and he will be older than Biden is now at the end of his term in office. During the Trump campaign, Trump became a convicted felon, and every day we got to witness Trump's further cognitive decline, which was contributing to his increasingly erratic behavior, like when he danced on stage for half an hour during a rally, or when he gave the microphone a blowjob. There was also the fact that the Republican Party had really underperformed in certain recent special elections, like in New York's 3rd Congressional District, although maybe some people would argue that that was because that district was held by George Santos, who was literally the worst human being to ever shame Capitol Hill with his presence. Also, the final October surprise that happened at Madison Square Garden, where the comedian made that lame Puerto Rico pile of garbage joke, should have turned off the Latino vote, you'd think, but it ended up having no impact on Trump's popularity within the Latino community at all. He actually got 42% of the Latino vote. So why did Kamala Harris, who ran what looked to be a very strong campaign, get absolutely blown out of the water by Donald Trump on Election Day? Well, it is multifactorial, of course, but there is one really big reason that I'll get into soon. But before I do, let me go over some of the lesser but still valid reasons as to why Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump. The first reason, Biden should not have run for re-election. That was a colossal mistake, and Democrats have every right to be mad at Joe Biden for doing so. Presidential campaigns, they usually begin shortly after the midterm elections, so candidates will be out on the campaign trail for close to 2 years in building a name for themselves and also establishing rapport with their voters. Kamala Harris only had 100 days, and that probably just wasn't enough time for Kamala to make her case to the American people. It's important to remember that most voters are pretty politically disconnected. They don't follow politics as fervently as your average political junkie, and even if they didn't like Trump, at least by voting for Trump, they knew what they were getting. I think Kamala's truncated campaign, it really helped contribute to her defeat, and I think voters really bought into the claim that Trump made that she was basically to the left of Karl Marx and some ultra-liberal, mostly due to her pretty left-wing positions that she took when she ran for president in 2019, even though she clearly moderated her positions and went to the center during her bigger campaign, but it was probably too late. The second reason is because I think incumbency was a big disadvantage in this election, not just in the United States, but all over the world. I know historically incumbency is seen as an advantage, but I don't think that is always the case, especially when the incumbent like Joe Biden is so unpopular. If you guys remember the 2006 midterm elections in the United States, for instance, Republicans got absolutely mocked, and that is because their Democratic opponents tied them to the increasingly unpopular administration of George W. Bush. Joe Biden, whether you think it is justified or not, is an unpopular president. Personally, I think Biden is a great president who accomplished a lot legislatively that, of course, Trump will claim credit for very soon, but he only had a 41% approval rating on Election Day, and that definitely hurt Kamala Harris. Kamala did try to distance herself from Biden late in the campaign, especially towards the end when Biden pissed away the Democrats' October surprise by calling Trump supporters trash. But what could she really do here? She's part of the Biden administration. She's the vice president. So as far as the U.S. electorate is concerned, she has the same disadvantage of incumbency that Biden would have had he not dropped out of the race. Trump wasn't popular in his first term either, of course, especially after he mishandled COVID. But that was 4 years ago, and like I said earlier, U.S. voters have the memories of a goldfish. The third reason is because the economic turnaround that the United States has been experiencing for the last several months, it simply came too late. For the bulk of Biden's term, U.S. voters were being faced with higher prices on food and gas due to growing inflation. Your average voter isn't going to care much about Trump's character when they're struggling to pay their bills and put food on the table or buy gas. It doesn't matter if it's Biden's fault or not. The incumbent administration will always be held accountable for the state of the U.S. economy, whether it is good or bad, and that further reinforces the point I made that incumbency was not an advantage in this election. Like I said, this has been a very bad year for incumbents all over the world, and the number one reason has been inflation. Things have been improving, though. The stock market hit higher numbers under Joe Biden than what was ever seen under Donald Trump, and the Feds managed to avoid a recession while getting inflation under control by achieving a soft landing, which has led to Jeremy Powell starting to cut interest rates. So, an argument could easily be made that things are getting better, and it's important not to change things radically and screw things up economically, but I don't think Harris made that argument very clearly. Sadly, these economic improvements just haven't happened fast enough for most people, and consumers are still feeling the pain of residual inflation, and since Kamala is part of the current incumbent administration, voters saw her as part of the problem, and that's why they voted for Donald Trump. Clearly, there are other issues too, like foreign policy and the immigration issue, but based on the exit polls, it doesn't actually look like foreign policy or immigration was as important to most voters as we thought it would be, and Trump killed a bipartisan immigration bill to not give Biden a win on immigration, and that actually looks like it was a good strategic move on his part, despite being totally hypocritical and bad for the American people. Now, there are other things I can get into as well, such as Trump's success with Latino voters or the decreased voter turnout amongst Democrats, but it's very difficult to give a concrete answer as to why those things happened specifically in this election. But none of this stuff even begins to tread water compared to what I think was by far the biggest reason as to why Trump won this election. You guys see this thing? Now, I know what you're all thinking, but Kevin, that's just a cell phone. What does it have to do with anything? And to that, I would say, wrong, sir. Wrong. This is not just a cell phone. This is a 24/7 propaganda machine and misinformation silo. I don't care how much money Kamala Harris raised or how many doors her supporters knocked on. None of that can even begin to compare to the influence that this device can have on its users who are connected all day to these social media empires whose algorithms feed their users affirmation for their confirmation bias as opposed to ever actually challenging them to think critically about any issue. Elon Musk literally bought Twitter, changed its name to X, and then he turned it into a massive propaganda machine for the alt-right. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Oh yeah, Kevin? Well, where do you get your news from? CNN, MSNBC? Surely you aren't saying that legacy media is better than alternative media, are you? Well, actually, yes, that is exactly what I am saying. Cable news networks like MSNBC, CNN, hell, even Fox News are infinitely better than the social media gutter trash that the majority of voters these days get their news from. And it has nothing to do with bias, chooms. That's why I mentioned Fox News. It's not about bias. It's about accountability. Cable news networks, as well as newspapers like the New York Times and Washington Post, are actually held accountable for what they publish. I'll go ahead and give you an example. Fox News was sued by Dominion for promoting conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. They ended up settling for $787 million million, and they even fired Tucker Carlson, who ran their top-rated show at the time. This proves that even the most biased legacy news media like Fox News can still be held accountable for spreading lies and defamation. But if Fox News can get sued for spreading lies about the 2020 election, then I'm sure Twitter, or excuse me, X, probably has lawsuits up the ass at this point, because election denialism tweets were so prevalent in that election that you couldn't walk 2 feet without tripping over one. But no, they faced no accountability whatsoever. In fact, there is even a law in place that protects websites from being held accountable for what their users published. It's called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. So, to sum up what that law does, well, first of all, what it doesn't do is that it doesn't completely shield websites from any lawsuits. It just says that websites like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram can't be sued for what their users post on it. So, if Dominion wanted to sue some trashy social media influencer for spreading election conspiracy theories on Twitter, they could absolutely do that, but they couldn't actually sue Twitter itself. Now, you may think, okay, that sounds reasonable. I mean, if I put up a bulletin board and people started posting violent rhetoric on it, I shouldn't be the one held accountable for it, right? But there are two major problems with this when it comes to social media in particular. The first problem is that there are tens of thousands of prominent social media influencers who are currently spreading lies, and many of them are completely anonymous. So there is no real practical way to hold them accountable for their actions, since they are too numerous and they are too hard to track down. The second major problem is that these social media giants like Facebook and X are not just neutral website owners. Their websites use algorithms that recommend extremist, defamatory, and outright dangerous content to their users on a regular basis. So these social media companies are not neutral in the slightest. They are active participants in this harmful content. So when they're confronted with this fact, they'll claim that the amplification of disinformation is not their fault. They'll say that it's just due to the computer algorithm that they use, and that they have to use an algorithm because no human could possibly sort through all the material that is posted every single day. Well, first of all, it is their algorithm, so they are absolutely responsible for its results. Secondly, traditional media like newspapers and cable news have human editors that are responsible for fact-checking all their content. They don't offload this process to a computer algorithm. Social media platforms don't want to hire human moderators because it would cut into their profits. Also, if Facebook or X are too big to moderate their own content, then maybe that's because they are monopolies and they should be broken up into smaller companies that can better police their content. But then they'll claim that this is all about more free speech. But they're absolutely bullshitting themselves here too, because there is another protection about Section 230 that these social media giants like to abuse. Section 230 also makes it so that websites cannot be sued for moderating their content. So that has led to people like Elon Musk to hypocritically censor accounts that are critical of him and his agenda, while at the same time promoting his own tweets and claiming to be a free speech absolutist. He's completely full of shit. And not only that, but it turns out that far right-wing influencers, including Dave Rubin as well as my good friend Tim Pool, were actually paid to promote Russian propaganda in order to help ensure a Trump victory.
Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy.
So, what happened when they were caught doing all this? Did YouTube ban their accounts? Did they stop being mouthpieces for the Kremlin? Nope. Nothing happened to them at all. Nothing whatso-fucking-ever. They're still being Putin's useful idiots to this very day. I mean, just think about how bad this is for a moment. Could you imagine if mainstream media was being paid off by Russia and the absolute outrage that would cause if it was ever discovered? If Fox News was discovered to being funded by Russia, they would be finished. But since this was social media that was doing it, there is no accountability whatsoever. And again, that is my point. It isn't about bias. It's about accountability. Legacy media has it. Social media does not. So what I'm trying to get at here is that Section 230 gives alternative media an unfair advantage over traditional media, and the far right has exploited this by investing heavily into social media, so much so that the internet is now almost completely dominated by trashy right-wing influencers who can lie and even accept funding from adversarial governments and still face no accountability whatsoever. The end result of all this unbridled alternative media corruption is that the Trump campaign can get a softball interview with Joe Rogan that gets millions more views than Kamala Harris gets from going on 60 Minutes and taking actually challenging questions, which of course Trump refused to do since he doesn't have the cognitive ability to handle something like that. That's why when he's outside of his comfort zone, Donald Trump collapses spectacularly, and we all saw that in his debate against Kamala Harris. Anyways, that's my take on what happened during the election and why I was wrong in my predictions. I underestimated both the influence of alternative media and also the short memories of the American people, as well as their gullibility. I say gullibility because if anyone actually believes Trump will keep his promises and fix anything, then they are kidding themselves. Trump is a proven pathological liar, and it's clear that the main reason he ran for president again was so that the voters would give him a get-out-of-jail-free card and also to line his pockets, because he is objectively the most corrupt president we have ever had in U.S. history. Now that he is basically king, though, thanks to the Supreme Court, things are only going to get worse from here in his second term. He's going to turn the USA into a plutocracy where he'll do favors for billionaires like Elon Musk in order to get favors back in return. Plus, after he claims credit for Joe Biden's economy on his first day as the best economy ever, he'll then subsequently ruin it completely with his terrible tariffs as well as his mass deportations. And that's not just my opinion here, chums. Already most economists, even from conservative publications, are predicting that the inflationary effects of Trump's policies will slow or eliminate upcoming interest rate cuts. So, I don't want to dwell any further on Trump's immorality, corruption, incompetence, cruelty, criminality, and I also don't want to say what it says about the American people who decide to put all those completely disqualifying characteristics aside and vote for him anyways. However, I do have to say that there is one thing related to treating hair loss that I'm worried about with Trump, and that is his bromance with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It seems almost certain at this point that Trump will appoint him as head of Health and Human Services. HHS oversees both the FDA and the CDC. If RFK Jr. is appointed to this cabinet position, he will have enormous power over health policy in the United States. The reason why I worry about that is that RFK Jr. is a massive conspiracy theorist and he is a complete fucking moron. He is not only against COVID vaccines, he is against all vaccines, including polio and measles vaccines that have saved millions of kids from illnesses, disability, and even death. He is even against the fluoridation of water, which is literally an obsolete communist conspiracy theory that is mocked even as far back as in the movie Dr. Strangelove, which was first released in 1964. In short, he is a wacko conspiracy theorist and he is a woo promoter. And Trump has already said he would have free reign to do whatever the hell he wanted as long as he didn't do anything with oil and gas. Now, I don't know for sure if RFK Jr. has an opinion on finasteride, but let's be real here. Is RFK Jr. really someone who you think would believe that finasteride is a safe treatment? Or does he seem more like the type of person who would be sympathetic to the post-finasteride syndrome conspiracy theory? He's a bigger conspiracy theorist than Ray Peat, and he has rallied hard against Big Pharma for his entire career. And because of all of this, I don't have the slightest doubt that he would believe in the post-finasteride syndrome conspiracy theory. And considering his disdain for the pharmaceutical industry in general, I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that he would be recruited by the PFS network to remove finasteride from the market. So, I hate to give you chums something else to worry about, but giving RFK Jr. oversight over health policy in this country will be a disaster on many levels, not the least of which is the battle against the slaphead curse. Now, I know what a lot of you chums are thinking right now, but Kevin, don't you know that Trump is a finasteride user himself? There's no way he would let that happen. Yes, I do know that, but Trump is about to become America's king, so he's still going to have finasteride even if it does get restricted to the public. And also, Trump has never even spoken publicly about his finasteride use. It's almost like he's ashamed of it. The only reason we even know about it at all is because a former doctor of him revealed it to the press. So Trump probably would not go out of his way to defend the drug, especially since he basically told RFK Jr. that he can do whatever the hell he wants. So getting back to my election prediction, I'm sure many of you will now think that any future predictions I make will be worth less than a bucket of piss, and I don't blame you. That's because I fouled up this year's prediction. But I think the last few elections have really shown us that the MAGA movement runs stronger campaigns when they are not in power. But next time, they will be the incumbents. They will actually have to govern, which they are absolutely terrible at doing. Literally the only legislation that Trump actually passed during his last term in office was a huge tax cut for the wealthy that blew up the national debt. This time, though, Trump isn't president. He's king, and he will have Congress and the Supreme Court well behind him. So he will probably actually pass more legislation, and people will really find out what it's actually like to live under a MAGA dictatorship. So my prediction is that by the midterm elections, people are going to be hurting and angry when prices actually go up instead of down, when China has taken over Taiwan and is controlling 90% of the microchip industry of the world, and when Latinos start seeing some of their family members being deported. American voters have made their choice, and now they will need to live with the consequences, and I'm honestly completely cool with that because in politics, sometimes it is more fun to be in the opposition. I do believe that the MAGA cult of personality will eventually be resoundingly defeated. Maybe not in the upcoming midterms, as I don't think Democrats are going to win back the Senate because there aren't enough competitive seats, but I do believe they'll win back the House, which will at least put one check on Trump's power so that the USA won't be his kingdom anymore and he can actually govern as president. And I'll be back with the next election prediction video then in 2026, so if you guys hate me talking about politics, don't worry because it's going to be a couple years at least before I cover it again. But anyways, the only reason I even made this video at all is because I think I really owed it to my viewers to give a follow-up to my last video, and I'm sure there will still be a lot of people in the comments section who are pissed off at me for my election takes, but don't worry, you're not going to hear them again anytime soon, because now it is time to move on and get back on track with more preem hair loss content, and I'll be back with that very soon, I promise. So thank you all for watching. God bless.